Three things happen when you arrive at an orchestral audition. First, they give you your audition deposit check back. They make you send these in as an extra incentive to show up on the day of the audition. If you don't show up, they keep your money. Second, they hand you the list of excerpts that you will be playing in the first round. Take a close look at this list. It'll be important later. And finally, third, you are either assigned a number, or in some cases, you draw numbers to determine what order your audition group will play in. Now, when I was in grad school, I attended a talk/Q&A session with Leonard Slatkin. The topic was orchestral auditions, and at some point the question of audition time slots came up. Does it matter where in the audition process you play? Is it better to be early in the day, somewhere in the middle, or somewhere at the end of the day? And the answer he gave was simple. It really doesn't matter. As long as you play well enough, you have a chance of advancing to the next round no matter where in the audition process you play. However, if there were going to be a couple spots that you should maybe try and avoid, try not to be the very first person to play, and try not to be the very last person to play. That brings us to the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra audition, where I was in the very first group of the day on Saturday morning. At the audition, we drew numbers to determine what order we would play in. And of course, I'm sure many of you can see where this is going, I drew number 1. Now, why did Maestro Slatkin say that you wanted to avoid going first? Well, it has to do with the committee's frame of reference. This dot is you. Because you are the first to go, you become the committee's initial frame of reference. You are the line by which the committee judges all the people immediately following you until they have established a sense of the overall level of the applicant pool. This is inherently a little unfair. Let's say that you play first and have a great audition. Everyone else in your round also plays well, but you just barely edge them out. But because this opening round was so close and the committee hasn't really established the overall level of the field, they may underestimate the level at which you played. So even though you played the best in your group, they may choose not to pass anyone on to the next round because they expect to hear better people in some of the later groups. And to be fair, it could also work the other way too, where they overestimate your playing and you get through when you shouldn't have. But either way, it's not ideal. Now, I've seen people advance to the next round despite having to go first. It's not the end of the world. Maestro Slatkin didn't think so either. It's just something that's slightly unfortunate. At this audition, however, I would discover another reason why you don't want to go first, and a big part of that has to do with the excerpt list I mentioned earlier. But let's come back to that later. Getting back to the audition, I was a little surprised by how long the list was. However, I wasn't too worried about it. I figured it would be one of those situations where the committee either verbally cut you off or let you know which excerpts to skip in the middle of the audition. Anyway, after drawing numbers to determine our order, I was taken backstage to a room to warm up in. While I'm warming up, I am a little worried about two separate things. The first of which is Capriccio Espagnol, because even though the original repertoire list listed it as one large excerpt, I was fully expecting to get to the audition and see that it had been divided into the two excerpts it's normally divided into. So even though I did practice it, just on the off chance that the committee really wanted to hear it this way, it's definitely still more difficult than playing the two excerpts by themselves. The other thing I was a little worried about was the Shostakovich 6 excerpt right at the end of the audition. It's just a difficult excerpt. Anyway, I had about 50 minutes to warm up. The audition was slated to start at 10 a.m., but it probably ended up starting about 10 minutes late. It's a little hard for me to gauge, just because when you're waiting, every extra minute feels like an eternity. But eventually the proctors came and got me and led me to the hall. And after the shockingly long walk from the stage door to the center of the stage, the audition had officially begun. I set up my music and instruments, I tested my reed in the hall's acoustics, and then there was nothing left for me to do but take a deep breath and begin the excerpts. And so I did. And I'm gonna be honest, the audition started pretty well. I got through the Mozart and both Beethoven excerpts with no hiccups, no note mistakes, no unfortunate squeaks, and at least on my end, I felt like my general phrasing and musicality were probably coming through in the way I intended. Now, I want to say this up front. There are people for whom this instrument is basically a children's toy. I am not one of those people. I have choked in an audition while playing nearly every excerpt on this list. So when I say things are going pretty well, what I really mean is this is just one of my better auditions, at least so far. Moving on though, we have the Mendelssohn Schedule. Now this is actually my first test for the committee because I want to see how they handle the extended excerpt. If you will remember, this was one of those 2-for-1s. And I want to see if they make me play the whole thing, if I only have to play the initial excerpt that most committees ask for, or if it's somewhere in between. And so I play. They ended up cutting me off about halfway down the page. And for me, that's awesome because I'm thinking, oh, I'm probably not going to have to play through the entire Capriccio Espagnole excerpt, which I was really worried about, or I might not have to play through the entire rest of the list, which is also a good thing, because even with the Mendelssohn Scherzo, which was not quite as good as the first 3 excerpts, but by no means a catastrophe, I feel like I've had a good audition. Basically, the fewer opportunities I have to blow it, the better. And so I keep going. And we have everyone's favorite, Prokofiev's Peter and the Wolf. And once again, it didn't go quite as well as the first 3 excerpts, but I get the cat up the tree and I haven't blown the audition yet. Now, I think it's important to remember that a lot of auditions would already be over. I played through 5 full excerpts, and for a lot of committees, that would be more than enough to let them know whether or not they wanted to hear you in the next round. On top of that, my audition started about 10 minutes late, and it's probably already been about 10 minutes. The committee's trying to hear 7 people in the hour, and so they are very clearly behind. At this point, while I'm switching between the Prokofiev and Capriccio Espagnole, I am silently waiting for the committee to call out and let me know that I should move on to the E-flat clarinet excerpts. Or at the very least, that I should only play the first half of the Capriccio Espagnole excerpt. And the committee doesn't say anything. And so I take a deep breath and begin the excerpt. And I'm happy to report that despite the added difficulty, it went well. In fact, it's probably the best, no, it's definitely the best I've ever played it in an audition. Because I think every other time I've played it in an audition, it has gone so poorly that my audition was basically over after that excerpt. And so at this point, my confidence is through the roof. I have jumped every hurdle so far in my path. And so with this confidence, I played the Rachmaninoff. And I don't think I've ever been so locked into an excerpt during an audition in my life. And it goes well. And so at this point, the only thing that's keeping me from a real chance, again, just a chance, but a chance nonetheless, of moving on to the semifinals are 2 little E-flat clarinet excerpts. And so I switch instruments. And the first thing I notice is that the clarinet is cold to the touch. Now, I've been down this path before. You play an entire audition, you pick up the E-flat clarinet, you play, and the first thing the committee hears is that you are suddenly 40 cents more flat than you were on your other 2 instruments. It's not a good look, and so I stall a little bit. I cover all the tone holes. I plug the bell up. I'm blowing hot air through the instrument. I'm using every strategy I can to get the instrument to heat up as quickly as possible. And when I think that I can stall no longer and that the instrument is at least marginally warmer, I begin. And sure enough, like the first measure was a little flat. But I was not going to lose the audition here. So I focus up, I engage my embouchure more, I force the pitch up, and I get through the rest of the excerpt. And so all that's left is 1 excerpt. 1 little Shostakovich 6 excerpt. The Chassis 6 excerpt starts something like this. And this is my best attempt at recreating what happened in the audition. It was instantly chaos. A complete implosion. I had missed some note and then begun spiraling as I missed more notes in some desperate attempt to somehow recover. Somehow, I managed to stumble my way to the first major rest of the excerpt, at which point a committee voice mercifully shouted out, "Thank you." And that was my audition. I got my instruments, I made the long walk to backstage, and then I just stood there silently packing up while the next candidate prepared to go. And this is when I truly discovered why going first has its downsides. Because as I stood there, a proctor arrived to let the next candidate know that the committee would be removing or modifying 3 of the excerpts on the list. Now, none of those excerpts were the Shostakovich 6. I cleared all the hurdles that they were modifying. Still, I had the most difficult audition of the day. I had the longest audition. And that's okay, because the moral of the story, and what I had really wanted to impart, besides just a funny story of me failing right at the end of this audition, was the idea that you should always assume the worst in an audition. Assume that they're going to ask for the excerpt that you really don't want to see in the first round. Assume that they're going to ask for the non-standard excerpt. And don't sit there like me, trying to psychoanalyze the committee to figure out what excerpt you're going to be playing next. If you're going first, just assume that you're going to have to play the full list. Anyway, I think this is worth saying. I'm not mad about how this audition went at all. In fact, I thought it was pretty fun. I mean, I got to wake up, walk 3 blocks, and then a panel of some of the best musicians in the country sat and listened to me uninterrupted for 20 minutes. That's awesome. That's a privilege, and I try not to forget that. So if anyone watching this was on the committee that day, thank you. Genuinely, thank you so much for listening to me. Because, well, of course, I would love to win an audition. I will always take being heard as a close second. Because at the end of the day, I think that's all any of us really want. We want to feel like we were heard. So thank you for that. And to everyone else, thank you so much for watching. If you have your own funny audition story, please feel free to share it down in the comments below. And until next time, happy practicing.